Aloha and welcome to Java. Thank you for joining me. This is for Friday, December 8th, 2023. Kind of a low moment here until we get the unemployment numbers, basically what the markets are waiting for. So we've got our favored risk indicator sitting right below 270, relatively stable the last few days. But as we were talking about yesterday, as expected, the relative dollar strength and the 10-year yield both rising a bit. So stocks still closed uh, in the green yesterday and showing relatively level at the moment, kind of flat, not much happening. Oil is beginning to get a bid, as we were talking about that as well. And the volatility index, or kind of the fear index, if you will, is rising a bit. So gold is in the negative at the moment. I expect that to start recovering as that VIX rises as well. Futures are showing the skepticism of the market at the moment. So we'll kind of wait and see what's going on. Sentiment right now, it's going to be all about these unemployment numbers because they are a determining factor for the Fed policy moving forward. And they're going to be making their rate decisions, their next decision, next Wednesday. And so depending on how these numbers come out, the market is going to kind of interpret that as a Fed move. So could be a large mover, and it's right before market opens. So as we can see, we're getting average hourly earnings, non-farm payrolls, and unemployment rate. Those are really the big movers for today, and they're all just prior to market open. So let's go right into the jobs. The real situation. So they're just now figuring this out. There's a saying, you've got to be careful what you wish for. The US economy has a new twist, deflation, and here's what that means. It's a different form of the rendering of basically a recession going into a depression. So we've got stagflation to where prices will remain high for a while. But if we go into this deflationary cycle, it's because so many people have lost jobs and don't have savings. They're no longer spending, as we were talking about before. So prices must come down. So basically, that means a larger number of businesses will be taking a loss on the current inventory they have, trying to restructure and cut their costs. Basically, and one major way to cut the costs is by cutting your labor if you no longer need them to produce. So, along with that, we had UPS firing 35 newly organized US workers, basically, the union getting involved again. So, UPS said it was a small number of employees and that they respect the rights to organize, but they have not committed any unfair labor practices. So, it's beginning, they're cutting. The unemployment rate is ticking up. And the markets right now, as I said, are kind of on hold, waiting for that jobless recession gauge, so to speak. So the other narrative that is in the mainstream media, there is strong US job growth seen in November. As the strikes were ending, this trend is slowing. The reality is that the amount of people that are out of work, regardless of the numbers that they skew, the number of homelessness and the number of joblessness is on the rise. And that will continue, as I said, right now by their numbers, but they're saying non-farm payrolls, the forecast to increase 180,000, and they're talking about unemployment rate expected to be unchanged at 3.9%. If you do that in real numbers, like with shadow stats, we're closer to the 10% area. And I expect the real numbers to a little more than double before this is over. So we're going to hit probably around 20% on full unemployment rate before this is over. These are also calculating in part-time jobs, or we call them underemployed. So a couple of stories with the banks and energy just for updates. Credit Suisse and UBS are basically merging. So they've got their first major step forward that they're doing that. So when they merge, taking over the assets and basically restructuring. So on the back end of that is where they are implementing the new payment systems. They don't talk about that section, but they're reallocating the assets, restructuring the debt on these troubled assets, and they're also putting in these payment systems to the banks that are emerging so that we can move to this tokenized system and open up more further for the central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, that are going to be rolling out, I think, before the end of first quarter next year. So we've got oil heading for the seventh weekly loss with supply surplus and weak China demand. However, we are near the lows of oil as far as the charts kind of showing a bottoming pattern. And a reminder is that these banks are also leveraged heavily in the energy sector. So while a lot of this is moving to nuclear, they're still heavily into coal, which is probably the dirtiest form of energy, by over 20%. So oil is the good, easy next step. And I expect that it's going to start rising again. When it does, we'll bring inflation with it. So right now we're in that tipping point, inflation, deflation. I think we're going to have that term where it's severe deflation or depression. It must correct to a point. But long term, inflation will win this one. It always does historically. There's a heavily deflationary period, but inflation always wins in the long run, at least with fiat currencies. So in the trade sector, this is actually a different story. It's Duke Energy disconnecting batteries at a US military base over Chinese fears. So they're beginning to quote unquote attack the infrastructure. And some of this is actually domestic. So while this particular instance, they're talking about China fears, there are a lot of domestic shutdowns on the infrastructure as well. So just be prepared for energy loss, especially going into winter. We're getting these heavy storms, weather disruptions. So whether it's generators or whatever, prepare ahead of time so that when they become unavailable, when things hit all at once, you and your family are okay. So I wanted to bring this up because this is all Vietnam. As you see, the Chinese investments booming as Xi visits Hanoi, and there's a decrease in US spending. However, Nvidia is looking to set up chip deals because this is a big section for them, whether it's Thailand, Malaysia, or Vietnam, basically all creating now and producing. They've got the labor. And with this last one, Vietnam is winning a credit rating upgrade from Fitch. So they are now producing up and coming economies, emerging economies. So moving back home to the United States, this is just Remington moving operations, but more are shutting. And this is due to local policies. So the government is basically shutting down small, medium businesses and running them out if it's their political stance. Anyway, moving forward, we've got Amazon going into healthcare. They've got One Medical memberships. I want to know your opinion on this. So one of the stance against this is that it is lower grade medical care. However, they're providing more for all. Also looking at nationalizing it. And this kind of a new thing that we're looking into which direction this will move. I think it's a decrease in quality as it's an increase in availability and supposed to be a decrease in cost. We'll see. So we've got also, this is kind of joining in with the political policies really kind of handcuffing the United States production. And talking about this is actually in blockchain, but this is in private trade. Blockchain is not cryptocurrency, but until they get a hold on it. So it's not up to the United States or the politicians as to whether this grows or not. They only limit the availability of the United States to be included in it. So this is a convergent story, in my opinion. Uh, Putin, Russia talking about Western banking dominance will end. Well, as the BRICS grow, they are kind of taking over where we're kind of hamstringing politically our own businesses and development because they want control first. And that's really not how it works. So, a couple of lava updates. I was talking about the nanobots. So, the biological, um, basically robots, talking about how they can exponentially self replicate. Well, it's every 20 minutes. They double. And if you look at that mathematically, so they're just catching on. And they're able to do more things with DNA. So we're going to keep an eye on this as they are gaining control of this. They're pushing out the first humanoid robot factory. This is in the United States, actually in Oregon. So they're in a race with China and Japan, actually, for these. So they want to get the humanoid. And why humanoid? So the focus on this. It's not robot, it's not automation. Now it's humanoid. So I find that very interesting. And then this is another bombshell story, in my opinion. And this has been a known thing. Basically, the UN is America. They provide the firepower behind it and guide all of the rules, which is why Russia did not want the expansion of the United Nations. So now they are talking about alternatives. Global players, quote unquote, global players, may decide the organization is too Western dominated and look for a new arrangement in the coming century. So the New World Order is coming, and this would just be one major uh, expansion to it. So, anyway, with that, just want to remind you any way you can live, trade, and think outside their system, self sustaining, gold, silver, real assets. And with that, my friends, stay free.